It wasn't the lipstick on her shirt collar that gave her away. It wasn't the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, or the sudden interest in yoga. It was Charlie, my damn parrot, who spilled the truth, and he didn't even know it. Funny thing about parrots, they hear everything. The fights, the laughter, even the things you wish they hadn't. And Charlie? He was an African gray with a memory, like a steel trap. For 2 years, he'd been my sidekick, mimicking everything from my grumbles about work to Sandra's sharp-tongued complaints about me leaving my socks everywhere. I used to think it was cute, until the day he said something that turned my entire life upside down. Sandra and I had been married for 25 years. We met in collège. She was the kind of woman who lit up a room the moment she walked in. Even now at 47, she still had that spark, slim figure, piercing green eyes, and a way of carrying herself that made everyone else seem a little less important. Me? I was just your average guy. 49, a little softer around the middle than I'd like, with a receding hairline and a love for greasy burgers that Sandra constantly reminded me was going to kill me one day. But we worked. At least I thought we did. Lately, though, things have fell off. It started small. Her phone always tilted away when I walked into the room, the way she'd laugh at text messages but never tell me what was so funny. Then there were the late nights. At first, it was work emergencies. Then it was yoga classes. Yoga. Sandra didn't even own a yoga mat until 3 months ago. You should come with me sometime, she'd say, her voice light teasing. I'm flexible enough, I joke back, brushing it off. But deep down, something wasn't sitting right. The first clue came on a Thursday evening. Sandra had left for her usual yoga class, and I was sprawled on the couch, nursing a beer and watching a rerun of a football game. Charlie was perched nearby, picking at a sunflower seed. "Who's a good boy?" I muttered absently, my eyes glued to the screen. Charlie squawked, "Oh, John, you're so handsome." I blinked, the bottle halfway to my lips. "What did you just say?" Charlie tilted his head, his beady eyes glinting. "Oh, John, you're so handsome." It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said it. The tone. It was Sandra's voice. Her exact inflection. My stomach churned. John? Who the hell was John? I sat there, staring at Charlie, my mind racing. Rational thoughts tried to take over. It's just a bird. He's probably repeating something he heard on TV. But deep down, I knew better. Sandra came home an hour later, her hair still perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She dropped her gym bag by the door and kissed me on the cheek, her smile just a little too bright. "How was yoga?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay casual. "Great," she replied, shrugging off her coat. "We did some deep stretches today. My hamstrings are killing me." I studied her, my eyes narrowing slightly. She didn't look like someone who'd just spent an hour sweating through Downward Dog. Charlie, ever the wild card, chose that moment to pipe up again. "Oh, John, you're so handsome." Sandra froze. For a split second, her face went pale, but she quickly covered it with a laugh. "Where does he get this stuff?" she said, glancing at me nervously. "Good question," I replied, my tone flat. Her laugh was forced as she grabbed her gym bag and disappeared into the bedroom. I sat there, staring at the bird. "Well, Charlie," I muttered, "you sure know how to pick your moments." Charlie bobbed his head, clearly pleased with himself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the moment over and over. Who was John? Could I be imagining things? Sandra's behavior had been strange, sure. But did that really mean anything? We'd been married for so long. I wanted to believe that she was the same woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But the more I thought about it, the harder it was to ignore the signs. The phone glued to her hand, the sudden interest in yoga, and now this. I turned over my back to her and stared into the darkness. If there was something going on, I needed to know. The next morning, Sandra left for work as usual, her phone in her hand and a fresh coat of lipstick on her lips. "You're working late again?" I asked as she grabbed her keys. "Yeah," she said, avoiding my gaze. "Client dinner." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Have fun." The door closed behind her, and I immediately sprang into action. Her gym bag was still by the door, exactly where she dropped it the night before. I unzipped it, half expecting to find yoga pants and a water bottle. Instead, I found a silk dress, a pair of high heels, and an expensive bottle of perfume. Not exactly standard yoga attire. My hands trembled as I zipped the bag back up and set it back in place. The evidence was mounting, but I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. And Charlie? He wasn't done talking. Sandra's car pulled out of the driveway at 7:15 a.m. sharp. I watched from the kitchen window, my coffee untouched on the counter. Her gym bag, now refilled with whatever secret she carried, sat neatly in the passenger seat. Client dinner, she'd said. Yeah, right? I muttered under my breath. Charlie whistled from his perch, tilting his head at me. Oh, John, you're so handsome. I turned to him, a grim smile tugging at my lips. We'll see about that, buddy. The doubts that had been simmering in the back of my mind for months were now boiling over. I'd ignored the signs for too long, convincing myself that I was just imagining things. But the silk dress, the perfume, and those damn words from Charlie were too much to ignore. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. If I came at her without proof, she'd twist the narrative, turn it into a fight about how I didn't trust her. No, I needed to be smart. The first step was figuring out who this John was. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Sandra's social media. She wasn't much of a poster, but she had a habit of liking and commenting on her coworkers' posts. It didn't take long to find him, John Ralston. His profile picture was a smug grin in front of a shiny red sports car. I clicked on his page, scanning through the photos. John was in his late 40s, tall and athletic, with a perfect smile and the kind of jawline that men like me lose in their 30s. Great, I muttered, a walking midlife crisis. Sandra had liked almost every one of his posts from the past 6 months. Beach vacations, dinner parties, even a selfie at the office. My stomach twisted as I stared at a photo of the two of them at some work event. She was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Charlie interrupted my thoughts with a loud whistle. He'll never know, he chirped. My head snapped up. What did you just say? Charlie tilted his head, ruffling his feathers. He'll never know. The chill that ran down my spine was ice cold. You've heard them, haven't you? I said, stepping closer to the cage. Charlie blinked at me, his beady eyes glinting in the morning light. He didn't answer, of course, but the weight of his words hung heavy in the room. That evening, Sandra came home later than usual. Her excuse was the same as always: traffic was awful. She kissed me on the cheek and went straight to the bedroom, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. Normally, she never let it out of her sight. My heart pounded as I glanced at the screen. I wasn't proud of what I did next. Her phone was unlocked. I opened her messages and scrolled through the list of names until I found him. John R. Their conversation was casual at first. Harmless even. Inside jokes, work-related banter. But then I reached the messages from last week. John, can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. Sandra, me too. Same time next week? John, absolutely. I'll bring the wine. My chest tightened as I read the words. It was all there in black and white. The late nights, the yoga classes, the silk dress, it all made sense now. Sandra's voice broke through my thoughts. Hey, what are you doing? I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. Nothing, I said quickly, locking the phone and setting it back on the counter. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. I'm taking a shower, she said, grabbing a towel and heading to the bathroom. As soon as the door closed, I let out a shaky breath. I had my proof, but I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. The next day, I decided to take things a step further. Sandra left for work at her usual time, and I immediately got to work setting up a small security camera in the living room. It was tiny, barely noticeable, and perfectly angled to capture Charlie's perch in the couch where Sandra often took her phone calls. If she was talking to John when I wasn't around, I'd know. By the time she came home that evening, everything was in place. Hey, I said casually as she walked through the door. How was work? Busy, she replied, her smile tight. I'm exhausted. She didn't seem to notice the tiny lens hidden among the books on the shelf. I kept my distance, watching as she settled onto the couch with her phone. She typed furiously, occasionally laughing at whatever was on the screen. Who's so funny? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Oh, just a group chat from work, she said without looking up. Charlie let out a low whistle. Oh, John, you're so handsome. Sandra froze. her fingers hovering over her phone. For a moment, I thought she might look at me, but instead, she stood abruptly and walked into the bedroom. I waited until she was out of sight before checking the camera feed on my phone. Sure enough, it had caught everything. Her reaction to Charlie's words, the way she clutched her phone like it was a lifeline. Over the next few days, I became a man on a mission. I installed another camera in the bedroom and began paying closer attention to her schedule. Each evening, after she'd left for a yoga class, I'd review the footage. It didn't take long to catch her. One night, while I sat in the darkened living room, watching the feed on my phone, I saw her pacing in front of Charlie's cage, her phone pressed to her ear. "I miss you too," she whispered. "Yes, I'll see you on Thursday." No, he doesn't suspect a thing. Charlie whistled softly. "He'll never know." Sandra laughed. "Even the bird likes you." I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening as I watched her sit on the edge of the bed, completely oblivious to the camera recording her every word. She thought I was a fool. But the game wasn't over yet. When you find out your wife is lying to you, everything changes. Little things you never noticed before suddenly stand out, like how she never leaves her phone unattended, or how her yoga classes conveniently align with nights when I have no meetings or calls. After a week of recording and gathering evidence, I had more than enough to confront her. The footage showed her pacing, whispering into her phone, and laughing at things no wife should laugh at when she thinks her husband is oblivious. But I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. The thought of an explosive confrontation was tempting, sure, but it wouldn't be enough. If she was going to destroy our marriage, I wanted her to feel the same devastation I was feeling, and I wanted it to be public. Charlie, of course, had his own ideas. "He'll never know," he chirped one morning as I was reviewing the latest footage on my phone. "Oh, I know, Charlie," I muttered, sipping my coffee. "Trust me, I know." The bird tilted his head, his gray feathers puffing up slightly. "Oh, John, you're so handsome." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Yeah, well, we'll see how handsome he looks when I'm done with him." That afternoon, I decided to pay a visit to Sandra's yoga studio. It wasn't hard to find. It was listed on our joint credit card statement under Wellness Center. I parked across the street, my heart pounding as I watched women in yoga pants filter in and out of the building. Sandra wasn't there, of course. Instead, I found a receptionist at the front desk, a perky woman in her 20s who greeted me with a bright smile. "Hi, welcome to Zen Retreat. How can I help you?" "I'm just curious," I said, keeping my tone light. "My wife's been coming here for a few months now." "Sandra Dawson?" I was thinking about joining her for a class. The receptionist tilted her head. "Sandra Dawson." She tapped at her computer, her smile faltering slightly. "I don't see her name in our system. Are you sure she's been coming here?" My stomach dropped. "Yeah, I'm sure," I said, forcing a chuckle. "She's probably just paying cash or something. Thanks for your help." I left the studio, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel of my car. There was the confirmation I didn't want but desperately needed. Sandra had never stepped foot in that yoga studio. By the time Sandra got home that evening, I was already 2 drinks in. "Hey," she said, walking into the living room. "How was your day?" "Fine," I replied, keeping my voice steady. She frowned, tilting her head slightly. "You okay? You seem off." "I'm fine," I repeated, taking another sip of my drink. Charlie, ever the opportunist, chose that moment to squawk. "Oh, John, you're so handsome." Sandra's eyes darted to the bird, her cheeks flushing slightly. "You really need to stop talking to him so much," she said, laughing nervously. "Oh, I don't think I'm the one he's listening to," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. She hesitated just for a moment before forcing a smile. "You're being weird," she said, brushing past me on her way to the kitchen. I stared after her, my mind racing. The cameras, the bird, the yoga studio, was all coming together. The next morning, I decided to take things up a notch. Sandra had left for work, her gym bag slung over her shoulder like always, and I spent the day reaching out to people who might know more about her activities. First, I called Greg, a mutual friend of ours who worked in the same office as Sandra. "Hey, Greg," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Quick question. Do you know a guy named John Ralston? He works with Sandra, right?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah," Greg said slowly. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Just heard the name and was curious." "What's he like?" Greg hesitated again. I mean, he's all right, I guess. Bit of a smooth talker. He and Sandra are pretty close. My grip on the phone tightened. Pretty close, yet Greg said awkwardly. They've been working on some big project together lately. Lots of late nights. She's mentioned him a few times. I thanked him and hung up, my stomach churning. That evening, I sat in the living room, reviewing the latest camera footage. Sandra had come home earlier than usual, claiming she wasn't feeling well, and now she was in the bedroom, scrolling through her phone. The camera feed showed her lying on the bed, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. Her phone buzzed, and she smiled, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I pulled up the audio feed, straining to hear the faint sound of her voice. "Miss you too," she whispered. "Can't wait for tomorrow." My blood boiled. Tomorrow? What was happening tomorrow? Charlie whistled softly from his perch, breaking the silence. He'll never know. I glanced at the bird, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. Oh, I think I'm starting to know Charlie. The next day, Sandra left the house dressed to the nines. Heels, a sleek black dress, and the same perfume I'd found in her gym bag. Big day at the office? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Just a client meeting, she said, avoiding my gaze. I nodded, watching her pull out of the driveway before grabbing my phone. It was time to follow her. Sandra's car disappeared around the corner, and I sat in the driveway for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My stomach churned with anticipation and dread. Whatever I was about to find, it would change everything. Let's see where this client meeting takes you, I muttered. The tracker I'd slipped under her car weeks ago, a small GPS unit I'd bought online, showed her moving steadily across town. The app on my phone refreshed every few seconds, a red dot marking her location. At first, I thought she might actually be heading to work. But then, her route veered into a more residential area. What kind of client lives in the suburbs? I said to myself, the words tasting bitter. I followed her at a safe distance, keeping far enough back that she wouldn't notice me. My heart pounded as I watched her pull into the driveway of a two-story house with a neatly manicured lawn. She parked, stepped out of the car, and walked to the door with her gym bag slung over her shoulder. A man opened it, a tall, athletic guy in his late 40s wearing jeans and a crisp button-up shirt. John! The way she smiled at him made my blood boil. She leaned in, kissed him on the cheek, and walked inside like she belonged there. For a moment, I sat frozen in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. There it is, I whispered. The truth. I didn't storm in. Not yet. That wasn't my style. Instead, I parked a few houses down and waited, my phone in hand. An hour passed. Then two. I watched as Sandra and John moved around the house, their shadows occasionally visible through the curtains. Finally, they stepped out onto the back patio. Sandra had changed out of her dress into something more casual, a loose blouse and jeans. She laughed at something John said, her head tilting back in a way that used to be reserved for me. I raised my phone and zoomed in, snapping picture after picture. My hands trembled as I saved each one, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and despair. It was nearly 3 p.m. when Sandra finally left. She hugged John at the door, kissed him again, and drove off. I waited until her car was out of sight before stepping out of mine. My legs felt like jelly as I walked up to the house. My plan wasn't perfect. I hadn't even decided exactly what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't leave without confronting him. John opened the door after my second knock, his expression shifting from confusion to mild annoyance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth practiced. "You're John, right?" I said, my tone flat. His brow furrowed. "Yeah, who's asking?" "I'm Sandra's husband." His face went pale. For a second, I thought he might slam the door in my face, but he held his ground. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice tight. "Save it," I snapped. I held up my phone, showing him the pictures. "You want to tell me what this is, or should I make a few calls?" John's mouth opened, but no words came out. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, man, I didn't know." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't you dare say you didn't know. You knew exactly what you were doing." He didn't deny it. Of course he didn't. I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end this right now. And if I hear your name again, I'll make sure every one of those photos ends up in the inbox of your boss, your ex-wife, and anyone else who might be interested in knowing what a piece of garbage you are." He swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "And don't think about warning her," I added, my voice low. "She won't see me coming." I turned and walked away, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't look back. That night, Sandra came home as though nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, chatted about her long day, and curled up on the couch with her phone. I watched her from the kitchen, my blood simmering as she typed away, smiling at whatever was on the screen. Charlie let out a soft whistle. "He'll never know." I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Oh, she'll know, Charlie," I muttered. "She'll know soon enough." For 2 days after my confrontation with John, I played the part of the oblivious husband. Sandra went about her routine, acting like nothing had changed, and I let her. She had no idea what I'd seen, what I knew. The thing about a good trap is that it doesn't rely on brute force. It's about patience, precision, and timing. In this trap, it was going to be perfect. It started with the guest list. Sandra and I had been planning a casual get-together for weeks, a barbecue with close friends and family. She'd invited some of her co-workers, including John. "You're okay with that, right?" She asked me over dinner, her voice carefully casual. I almost laughed. The audacity. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "The more the merrier." She seemed relieved, her smile widening as she sipped her wine. I could feel the lie hanging between us like smoke. In the days leading up to the barbecue, I set everything in motion. The cameras had already done their job, but I needed one last piece of evidence, something undeniable. On Thursday, while Sandra was out, I went through her phone again. Her messages with John were as incriminating as ever. "John, can't wait to see you this weekend." "Sandra, me too. Let's make some time after the party." I copied the messages to my laptop, saving screenshots along with the photos I'd taken outside John's house. Then I prepared my secret weapon, Charlie. The night before the party, I sat in the living room, training the bird. "Say it, Charlie," I coaxed, holding up a sunflower seed. Charlie tilted his head, his beady eyes gleaming. "Oh, John, you're so handsome." "Good," I said, nodding. "Now try this." "I love you, John." Charlie squawked, flapping his wings. "I love you, John." I tossed him the seed, a wicked grin spreading across my face. Sandra's lies were about to come back, to haunt her in the most spectacular way. The day of the barbecue was bright and sunny, the kind of picture-perfect afternoon that makes you forget for a moment that your life is falling apart. Guests started arriving around noon, filling the backyard with laughter and the smell of grilled burgers. Sandra flitted from group to group, her laugh a little too loud, her smile a little too wide. And then John arrived. I watched from the grill as he walked in, carrying a bottle of wine and greeting Sandra with a hug that lasted just a second too long. She blushed, glancing around to make sure no one noticed. "Oh, I noticed," I muttered under my breath. As the afternoon wore on, I waited for my moment. I'd positioned Charlie's perch near the patio, where everyone could hear him clearly. All I had to do was give him the right cue. It came during dessert. Sandra was sitting with a group of friends, laughing at something John had said. I stood nearby, pretending to check the cooler, when I whistled softly, the same whistle I always used to get Charlie's attention. Charlie flapped his wings, letting out a cheerful squawk. "Oh, John, you're so handsome." The laughter around the table died instantly. Sandra's smile froze, her eyes darting to the bird. "What did he just say?" Charlie bobbed his head, his voice louder this time. "I love you, John." A few guests exchanged awkward glances, murmuring under their breath. Sandra's face turned crimson. "Funny bird," John said, forcing a laugh. I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "Funny? You think that's funny, Sandra?" Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide. "Mike, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that my wife has been sneaking around with him," I said, pointing at John. The murmurs grew louder as everyone turned to look at them. "This is ridiculous," Sandra said, standing abruptly. "You're making a scene." "Oh, I'm just getting started," I said, pulling out my phone. I tapped the screen, and the camera footage from a rendezvous with John played on the outdoor speaker system. Gasps filled the air as the video showed Sandra kissing John on his doorstep, laughing like a love-struck teenager. "Mike, stop," she cried, her voice cracking. "Why?" I snapped. You weren't worried about making a scene when you were doing this. John stood, his face pale. I think I should leave. You think? I said, stepping toward him. Sit down. You're not going anywhere. Sandra tried to defend herself, stammering about how it wasn't what it looked like, how I'd misunderstood. But the evidence was undeniable. One by one, our friends began to leave, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. By the time the yard was empty, Sandra was sitting at the patio table, her head in her hands. Mike, please, she said softly. Let me explain. I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of everything crashing down around me. There's nothing to explain, I said finally. You made your choices. Now you can live with them. I turned and walked into the house, leaving her to face the fallout alone. The house felt impossibly quiet after everyone left. Sandra sat on the patio, her face buried in her hands, while I stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the empty wine bottles and the remnants of a party that had gone up in flames. Part of me wanted to feel victorious. I'd planned it all perfectly, and it had gone off without a hitch. John had slunk away like the coward he was. Sandra had been exposed for the liar she'd become, and our friends had witnessed every second of it. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was emptiness. Sandra finally came inside after what felt like an eternity. Her eyes were red and puffy, her mascara smudged from tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. She stopped in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. Mike, please, she said softly. Can we talk? I didn't look at her. What's there to talk about? She took a hesitant step forward. I messed up. I know I did. But we've been together for so long. Doesn't that count for something? I turned to face her, my jaw tightening. Count for what, Sandra? For lying to me? For sneaking around behind my back? For humiliating me in front of our friends? What exactly do you think that counts for? She flinched at my words, tears welling in her eyes again. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. It just happened. I let out a bitter laugh. It just happened? That's the best you can come up with? What? You tripped and fell into his arms. Mike? No. I held up a hand, cutting her off. I'm done, Sandra. I don't want to hear it. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. The next morning, I woke up early, my resolve as sharp as ever. While Sandra slept in the guest room, her silent acknowledgement that she no longer had a place next to me, I started making calls. First, to our lawyer, then to a realtor. I wasn't going to let her drag this out. By noon, I'd packed up my most important belongings and left a stack of papers on the kitchen table, divorce documents, a list of financial accounts to be divided, and a terse note outlining the timeline for selling the house. Sandra came downstairs as I was loading the last box into my car. She looked disheveled, her hair a mess and her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. You're really doing this, she said, her voice breaking. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. I already did. The fallout extended far beyond our house. Word of the barbecue spread like wildfire through our social circles. By Monday, everyone at Sandra's office knew what had happened. John, it turned out, wasn't just a co-worker. He was her superior. And while their affair might not have broken any official policies, it certainly shattered his credibility. Within a week, John had been quietly let go. Sandra stayed on, but the whispers and sidelong glances followed her everywhere. For me, the hardest part wasn't walking away, it was rebuilding. 25 years is a long time to share your life with someone. And even when they betray you, the memories don't just disappear. Some nights, I'd sit in my new apartment, staring at the photos I hadn't yet decided to throw away. Charlie would perch nearby, watching me silently, as if he understood. Say something funny, Charlie, I'd mutter, hoping for a distraction. The bird tilted his head, his feathers puffing up. Oh, John, you're so handsome. I burst out laughing, the sound echoing in the empty room. You're a menace, you know that? Charlie whistled, clearly pleased with himself. Months passed, and life slowly began to stabilize. The house sold, the divorce was finalized, and I found a strange kind of peace in my new routine. Sandra reached out a few times, asking if we could meet, if we could talk things through. Each time, I politely declined. She'd made her choices, and I had no interest in revisiting them. Instead, I focused on myself. I took up hiking, reconnected with old friends, even started going to a local trivia night where I became something of a regular. One night, as I sat at the bar nursing a drink, a woman slid onto the stool next to me. "Nice bird," she said, nodding toward the picture of Charlie-eyed set as my phone's wallpaper. "Thanks," I said, smiling. "He's quite the character." "Does he talk?" "Oh yeah," I said, chuckling. "You wouldn't believe some of the things he says." As the conversation flowed, I realized something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Sandra's betrayal had been devastating, but it hadn't broken me. If anything, it had reminded me of what I deserved: honesty, respect, and a chance at real happiness. And as Charlie liked to say, he'll never know. Except this time, I did.